Welcome to the Town of Kirkland Lake Finance meeting of March the 28th, 2017. Approval of the agenda.
It's moved by Councillor Morgan, seconded by Councillor Barker, that Council approves the agenda for its finance meeting of March 28th, 2017 as presented.
All in favor? Approved. Any declaration of pecuniary interest? None declared. Any petitions or delegations? None declared. Reports of municipal officers and communications. Just before Jen comes up, I'll just make a few comments about the budget process, what we've come to so far. As of last meeting, I'll just kind of do a bit of a summary. The 2016 tax levy was about $11 million. For 2017 will be $9,438,000, which is a reduction of 1.6 million. The total tax levy, including capital, in 2016 was 11 million. So we've deducted from that the sewer budget, which was $1,216,954. So that came right off the top. So our base start was $9,820,416. The proposed levy for 2017 is with the capital budget is $9,437,843. So a total reduction in the tax levy of approximately $400,000. There's no consideration for generating additional working capital. The capital budget that's coming out of the levy is $520,000, which is double that of 2016. So the total capital budget is about 17 million, which includes 12.8 for the pool. We're going to look at a couple of different tax rate scenarios. So Jen, if you would step up, please.
So as we had discussed at the last meeting, we did those couple of operational budget changes and those two reductions out of the capital levy. So as the finance chair had indicated, the total amount that we're looking to levy is the $9.4 million. So that's on your, you call it tax rate scenario number 1. It's presented up here. This has no dollar value money putting into working capital, and this is also taking into consideration what we call revenue neutral ratios. So we're attempting to keep the same level of distribution among the tax classes as in 2016. There is still a slight reduction because we are going to be levying less dollars than we did in 2016. However, this is how the rates would shake out for the different classes. As indicated above. The ratios, we're not going to talk about it too long, but they are, I have put a line in what the provincial average is for the multi-res commercial and industrial. We are above the provincial average in both the commercial and the industrial classes. However, we are allowed to do so because we're going to be adopting, or could potentially be adopting, revenue neutral. So is there any questions on this one?
So we are at level or below level on multi-res?
We are below the level.
As we stand now?
Yeah. There's very little flexibility when we're, I can't just say, oh, let's put the multi-res ratio up to the provincial average just like everybody else, because I've opted to work with revenue neutral to try and kind of raise the same amount of taxes as we have last year. So therefore I'm limited to say Opta says, let's choose a ratio of 1.56, so that's what we choose. We can't just choose 1.8 or 2, as much as we'd like to. So then on the next page, there's all the potential tax impacts on the various property classes. And you'll notice that the majority of all properties will be seeing decreases amongst the classes. As mentioned in last meeting, the average assessment increase across the residential sector is 7%, but again, that's average, right? So that's why you do see 300 and some properties that are experiencing an increase, because some properties could see a 30% assessment increase, and some properties could see a 2% assessment increase, and MPAC's averaging that at 7. So that's why there are some properties that are seeing increases, and the majority of them are seeing decreases. So the second scenario is just a change in tax rates. We're still going to be levying the same dollar values. However, we won't be adopting revenue neutral ratios. This is just keeping with our existing ratios as we did in 2016. So you'll see that we're going to be we would levy less dollars in residential and significantly less dollars in industrial, because there was large assessment decreases in the industrial sector. Oh, yeah, sorry.
So Jen, in the first scenario, we would be looking at, for residential, a reduction of 19.6% change in rates for residential.
Yep.
Multi-res would go down, the rate would be decreased by 30%, as opposed to scenario number 2, which is more evened out at about 17.5%.
Across the board, yep.
What's your feeling of both these ratios, rates?
Well, I feel like my recommendation is to adopt revenue neutral, because our goal is to ensure that we are levying the same amount or close to the same amount of tax revenue amongst the classes. So, industrial, we're going to continue to try and levy about $1 million, whereas if we choose a second scenario, we're only going to be levying about $700,000 from the industrial class. And so that means that shift, the additional tax dollars that we need, will be being picked up from residential, the majority of it. I mean, if you look at multi-res, yes, they're getting a large tax rate decrease. However, the actual dollar value is only a $60,000 change. It's not that we're levying a whole lot of less dollars from them. The big change comes in the industrial class.
Do you mind if I ask Nancy for a little bit of input here? We were discussing this earlier.
When we were looking at the ratios and that, when we looked at the minus 17.646 across the board, it looked more equitable to everybody. And it seemed like a fairer thing. But I also do understand the other one, that you're putting a reduction on the industrial on the backs of the others. Certainly the multi-res being below the provincial average probably doesn't need such a large reduction, and the rest of the classes are suffering a little bit for that one. But I understand with revenue neutral, there's really no other way to balance it. So initially, I felt like the minus 17.46 was the most equitable thing to do for all classes, but now that Jen's pointed out that the rest of the classes are going to suffer for the industrial impact, I think I've changed my mind about how I think about that, and I think I follow the same recommendation as that. The only other thing is I wanted to point out to council, and I know everybody's probably aware, is that when you're making this deep a reduction, you're going to be at this starting point for next year. when things go up, such as wages and heat and hydro, and everything goes up, you will still only be collecting this amount of taxes. So it's going to be a tough year next year to maintain this kind of cut. Absolutely, we have to take the sewage costs right off the top, and to go deeper than that is, you're going to suffer for that a little bit next year, but that's up to council. That's council's decision to do. But I need to mention it.
And if I could just add to that, Nancy, so if this will be our, should council choose to adopt the revenue neutral ratios where we're at, and that our operating budget would be a levy of $9.4 million. Next year, on a go-forward basis, because our commercial and industrial ratios are above the provincial average, and should they remain there again in 2018, if we have a budgetary increase, so anything more than $9.4 million that we levy next year, we're only allowed to levy 50% of that from those classes that are above the provincial average. So next year, say, or I'm just going to throw this out, that goes up to $9.8 million we need to levy because of changes. I'm just using a drastic number. That extra $400,000 that we need, well, we can only levy 50% of that from commercial and industrial, and the remainder will come off of the other classes that are not above the provincial average. So that's another repercussion of, you know, the deep reductions and then having to come back from that in any subsequent years.
In scenario one, which is revenue neutral, so 90% of the properties would have a tax reduction. There's roughly 10% that would see a slight increase of an average of $26 overall. We can't do it as 100% based on this formula that we have to use, so some of these people may have had a higher assessment since the last assessment was done. But it does offer a substantial decrease in taxation for residential, which is what we were trying to do initially. So personally, I would favor the first presentation, even though it's deep cuts. Any comments, Councillor?
Yeah,
So,
I'm certainly
Jim?
in favor of the revenue neutral scenario. As far as the deep cuts go, yeah, certainly next year, if we have to increase taxes, we need to justify it, and I don't have any trouble with that. If there's reasons we have to, then, you know, that's a decision we need to make next year. But for this year, I'm quite happy to see these numbers, and I'd certainly support the first scenario.
Jean-Guy?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if we can do anything, and Jen will tell us. The problem we have, Pat, is that the water rate, the 1.6 million,
1.2.
or 1.2, okay, 1.2, is paid by the residential people, because all the industrial has either a meter or something. So it's all residential, but that tax that we save there, well, not save, but that we take out of there, we split it all over the place. So now the residential, which were at 6.6 last year, subtract 1.2, they should be at 5.4. They have 5.8. So basically, it went up for the residential.
Jen?
So the water and sewer, there are some industrial properties that don't, it doesn't matter whether you're flat or metered, everybody has a sewer charge.
Yeah,
If
yeah,
you
yeah.
don't have a municipal sewer connection, then of course you're spared from that sewer charge.
But if they're meter,
You still have 80%. 80% of your metered water is
We'll
a
go-
sewer charge.
okay, is that what it is? Okay.
Yep.
But some of them don't have sewer charge.
There are select properties along the small corridor that we have running along 66 from,
For example,
The
the
corner.
mine does have sewer charge.
no, and that was all factored in
Yeah.
when we did the capital plan.
But how come then the amount levied is so different? Like, they didn't go down much, well, they went down, 6.6 to 5.8, which is that what the amount is, you think, in the sewer charge that we're charging people? The residential amount only? So
Well-
last year they paid 6.6, this year they're paying 5.8. So that's $800,000. So is that what they're paying to the 1.2 about?
There are some industrial properties, though, that do have sewer charge, and there's some industrial properties that do not have a sewer charge.
Yeah.
And that was all factored in when we came up and developed the capital plan, that we were aware
So
that
it's
there
hard,
were
yeah.
certain properties that were already not paying, that didn't have a sewer connection.
Because I know it says 90%, but I don't think it'll be 90% after you add the water rate, which was,
Some people, you're right,
I mean,
some,
you're 90%, but after you add water rate, we might be at 40 or 30% again.
well, I
It
don't
might
think,
be, I don't know.
I think that's pretty hard
Yeah.
to say
kinda-
that.
Yeah.
But that's a good point, because some people will have a bit of an increase, in that's sewer charge than they were paying in their tax bill from previous years. Plus, we've added that 3% for,
Water.
well, plus water, plus 3%, into a reserve fund for the long term, so they will see some increase in some cases. 90% is probably, a bit of a stretch, I agree.
Yeah. There was no way to give more to residential, Jen?
More of a decrease?
Yeah, like with those numbers there?
No, because
Yeah, I
we're restricted by the ranges of flexibility, as determined by OPJA.
So you just have to watch, Pat, what we say. When we say, like, we should never say 90% of people will have a reduction, because we know it's not gonna be true. Like, no, but I'm saying, we should, like, I don't even know
I
how much it's
agree.
gonna be. It might be 50, 40, 60, I
Yeah,
don't know.
I'm probably a bit high,
Yeah,
it's 89.
I wish.
Tony?
Yeah, both scenarios are great when we can offer the taxpayers a reduction in their tax rate, so both are great. I have a little bit of an issue with the first scenario. I guess mainly because when residential gets their assessments and they feel it's too high, I mean, we always say, well, we have nothing to do with the assessments. You have to appeal at MPAC, and rightfully so. But all of a sudden, the industrial got a reduction in their assessments. And we're saying, oh, no, that's not really good. But legally, they have a reduction in their assessments, so they should pay less than what they paid the year before. Because that's the same thinking we used with residential. If your assessment goes up, your taxes are going to go up. If your assessment goes down on residential, your taxes go down usually. But when it's the other way, and we're making the decision, we tend to say, oh, no, let's bind around the industrial, because the residential can't afford to pick up the rest in all the other sectors. And I think it was about $300,000 difference in commercial, industrial, Jen, would that be? You know, so we're sort of talking out of both sides of our mouth, and that's the thing I don't like.
Well,
If your assessment goes down, you pay less. And I think it's fair that it all is. That's why I sort of favor the 17 across, because all the sectors chip in for the reduction in the industrial reduction of assessment by a big business. And I think if it's good for us to increase taxes because assessment goes up, then we're obligated to reduce taxes in that same sector when the assessment goes down. That's my thinking beside it.
Tony, I think
So-
one other thing, just a sec, Jen, if I may comment. Like, one sector of the industrial got a huge break, which is costing us about $300,000 in the tax levy. So we had to make up for that, and it's not easy to do, but I think it's fair the way it.
Yeah,
it
and
came out.
I know it's, I can't disagree with that, Chair, but they didn't really get a break. They just got a different assessment. They got what their assessment is. It's not like we're giving them a break. They didn't get no break. They get their assessment in the mail, just like residential, just like commercial, and they pay their taxes. I think it's somewhat unfair for us to say, oh, you're our biggest taxpayer, really doesn't matter what that assessment says. It only matters when it benefits us, but when it hurts us, it really doesn't matter. And that's the message that I don't want to get out to our biggest taxpayer. I mean, they're probably tickled pink that their assessment went down, but that's how we base our taxes, on assessment. You know, that's my thoughts for right now, thank you.
Jen?
So this has been an ongoing discussion, I'd say for almost a year now. MPAC has had, they've had lots of reviews. There's been a special business property review that was their main focus in 2016, coming up for this 2017 phase-in year. There's been several northern municipalities who are single source income towns, such as we are, lots of mining towns, who are greatly affected by this change in assessment process. They've changed their methodologies. We've had various meetings with MPAC and the affected industrial owners. It's not just the mining sector, it's also the manufacturing and whatnot. It's everybody that's classed in this special business property assessment review. It's not just a discussion at this point. We've had many discussions with the affected property owners, and what we're trying to create is a equitable tax, because MPAC is not creating that equitable assessment for the next 4 years. So we're trying to create an equitable levy for them, for all industrial owners across in the next 4-year phase-in cycle. So it hopefully will not be something that's been blindsided. It has been a point of discussion for a while, and this is where the recommendation from the Finance Committee has come at this point in time.
Todd?
I just wanted to pick up on a comment that was made earlier, and I think it was Jen that made the comment about the fact that if the reductions are made across the board, when, not if, I mean when we have to raise taxes back up again, the commercial and industrial sectors do get special treatment. They only get a 50% increase of what everybody else gets, right?
Of the provincial levy.
Right.
Yep.
And that's I think where we've got to be cautious. I mean, I've always been in favor of reducing commercial and industrial taxes. I think that's, you know, we need to send a message to those sectors in our community that we're serious and we're welcoming to have them in our community. But it does create an issue down the road when we try and, like, this is kind of a unique year, if you will. I think we've all recognized that, where we're trying to pass along these savings, but we don't want to hamstring ourselves for in the future when we need to, you know, bring these taxes back up a little bit. And I'm afraid that if, as much as, you know, I agree completely with what Tony said, I think we just have to be careful about hamstringing ourselves in the future, because then any increase is going to be shouldered by the residential sector, and that's problematic, obviously. So it's not, neither solution is perfect. I just want to, you know, put that out there.
No, fair comment, Todd. Yeah. Any other comments?
Sorry, just in both of those scenarios, both instances, commercial and industrial, are both above the provincial average. Okay, okay, sorry.
Tony?
Just a quick, because, and I certainly got nothing against multi-res. I mean, I'd like to see multi-res get a huge reduction, you know, but because they're below the provincial average already, why couldn't have that sector, like, when we mined them, they went really down to 30, from 17 to 30% reduction. Because they were already below the provincial, couldn't have they buffered that up a little bit? Because we shouldn't be governed by their above provincial average, because multi-res is already below provincial average.
That's just the ratio. So in revenue neutral, though, we're looking, a revenue neutral looks to see, okay, how much levy taxes did you levy from each class last year? Let's try and levy that same amount. So regardless of where the ratio is at, we're just trying to levy that same amount that we tried to do last year. So saw large assessment increases. That sector saw large assessment increases in 2017, but we still want to say we levied $460,000 from you last year. Let's try and levy the same amount this year. And so the ratio has no effect.
It's on the full dollar value.
It's on the dollar, what we're trying to achieve, the dollar value. And the ratio is just kind of the middleman, how we got to there. And again, I don't have any control over to try and put it up above or try and put it below. It's all computer generated these days.
Yeah,
I
no,
press a
and that's-
button.
Councillor Barker?
It's definitely a tough budget. I side with Nancy. If we cut too deep this year, it could impact us negatively next year, and I worry about that from a long-term planning perspective. But I'm leaning towards scenario one, moving forward, and then next year, looking and seeing where we can find efficiencies and moving forward.
Can we just, maybe we'll get a summary on which scenario, unless there's any additional discussion. Jean-Guy?
I would go with the one that says 17.46 everywhere. Thank you. I know it's one or two, but.
Tony?
I'm, again, for the 17.46 across.
Okay. Todd?
It's very close for me, but I would have to go with the first scenario with the, as much as I think, multi-res, multi-res is a really tough one because the majority of our multi-res are government buildings, like social housing, so it's really not that big of a burden, but we do have a couple of landlords that do have, multi-res, so, it kind of irks me a little bit that we're, that fell out of the equation when Jen pushed the button. But, other than that, I don't want to see residential taxpayers shouldering the burden going forward, so I'd have to go with number one.
Jim?
Yeah, and I'm certainly in favor of scenario one, the revenue neutral, for the same reasons.
Yeah, just to clarify, the
Oh, that one, yeah.
17.46 is scenario two. Or, yeah, number 4 on the sheet. The first one that, in your binder is, scenario 1, revenue neutral, which is, 19.6. So just to clarify,
It was with both of them. One of them is 9,437,000, and the other one is 9,430,000. I noticed that earlier. Oh, you well aware of that? Okay. So- Okay. So those numbers are not right. Like, which one is right? The 437 or 430?
Even once, we're looking at this today, and when I go back into Opta, when we go to, like this afternoon, we're just going to be passing the operating and capital budget. So it won't be until the meeting of April 18th, that we'll be actually adopting the rates and ratios at that point in time. So between now and then, there are lots of assessment changes that happens between MPAC and Opta. So it's not going to be exactly 19.60 come April 18th. The general number of 19 will be there, but I can't hold me to that. It's going to be a 19.6% decrease because there are changes that happen between now and then when we do our data cutoff.
okay, so Tom, you're in favor of the 19.6?
Yeah, I'm not with that.
Tony? Just clarify.
I've said, yeah, I'm gonna go with the majority.
And Todd said, yeah. Jim? Same? Yeah, I'm in favor of it as well. Yeah.
So I have a resolution that is moved by Councillor Barker and seconded by Councillor Morgan. The council approves the tax rates for 2017 as presented with the treasurer as shown in scenario number 1.
All in favor? Approved. Unanimous.
Did you want to talk about this one? Or it's good as is? Okay, so adjournment. It's moved by Counselor Morgan, seconded by Counselor Barker. The council adjourns its finance meeting of March 28th, 2017 to a regular meeting of council.
All in favor? Thank you. We'll have a 2-minute break before we start the regular meeting of council.